Everyone, good afternoon everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Nous allons commencer. We're going to start in a little bit. We can get your attention. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Kizan Sami and I have been asked to moderate the session. I have with me four very fantastic presenters, and so I just want to do a brief introduction before we begin. So for myself, I've been a member of CAIDP for the last, I would say 4 or 5 years, not very long. I've been in the development game for quite a lot longer, and I have the honor today of being able to speak about gender lens investing, which is quite near and dear to my heart. For those persons in the room, just acknowledging that we are a bilingual country. Bonjour tout le monde, je suis Kizan Sami. J'étais un membre de CAIDP depuis 4 années. Aujourd'hui, je vais parler du sujet, l'optique de genre, avec le but ultime d'amélioration de la vie des personnes et aux retombées économiques. Le sujet est extrêmement important pour nous dans le Canada et dans tout le monde. And today we're then going to be able to speak with 4 different groups that have been part of CAFID. So for those that don't know, CAFID is the Canada Forum for Impact and Investment and Development. It has formed this group, a community of practice called the Gender Lens Investing Community of Practice, formed in 2021, as a forum to support members to deepen their GLI knowledge, networks and practices. So there are over 30 CAFID members who work across Latin America, Africa and Asia in a range of sectors, including innovation and growth, which is what I spoke to just now. Part of the work that's been done under CAFID and within this community of practice is the analysis of systemic barriers that prevent the equitable flow of demand-driven capital to women investors, entrepreneurs, as well as firms that employ women or have women in their supply chains. So this afternoon, we've got 4 persons, one from the IDRC, one from MEDA, one from FinDev Canada, and one from Equality Fund. So the first presenter will be Colleen Duggan. Colleen is a team leader for the Sustainable Inclusive Economies Program at the International Development Research Center, IDRC. During her years at IDRC, she has fulfilled multiple roles, including Senior Analyst for Strategy Program Leader of the Governance and Justice Program, and Senior Evaluation Specialist. Colleen has 3 decades of expertise in strategic programming, I do not like that word, strategic, evaluation and funder relationship management in the areas of human rights, governance, gender equality, women, peace and security, and the rule of law. Following Colleen's presentation will be Lindsay Wallace. Lindsay is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Impact at MEDA. With over 25 years of experience in international development, Lindsay has spearheaded economic analysis, impact measurement, program design, and strategic initiatives. Her expertise lies in conducting economic research and modeling across the education, agriculture, and financial inclusion domains. And additionally, Lindsay is the current board chair of the Canada Forum for Impact Investment and Development, CAFID, who is supporting this particular session. Following Lindsay's presentation will be Jessie Brown. Jessie Green, apologies. I totally renamed her. So Jessie has joined FinDev Canada in 2021, where she's responsible for overseeing the 2X Canada facility, a blended finance facility funded by Global Affairs Canada, supporting women's economic empowerment in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa. With over 20 years experience investing in developing countries, Jessie previously worked as Director of Investments at Développement International des Jardins and a Senior Investment Officer at Triple Jump in the Netherlands. Jessie has a PhD in Agriculture Economics from Université Laval in Quebec. And finally, last but not least, Jacqueline Ovens is going to be speaking to us on behalf of the Equality Fund. So Jacqueline is the VP of the Investment Program at the Equality Fund. The Equality Fund's unique model activates investment alongside feminist philanthropy and high-trust grant-making to bring about long-term sustainable and powerful change. Prior to joining the Equality Fund, Jacqueline was a managing partner in Export Development Canada's investment group, responsible for the Inclusive Trade Investments Program, a $200 million program which provides equity growth capital to companies founded or led by diverse Canadians, and to venture capital funds demonstrating a commitment to promoting diversity on both sides of the investment table. She also oversaw equity investments into the sustainable food and agricultural sector, and was responsible in the portfolio management and operations of the group's $3 billion of committed capital. Jacqueline has worked in the M&A advisory roles with investment banks in London, Avington Financial, Montreal, and Toronto Merrill Lynch. So just to set the stage for this, and when we talk about gender lens investing, and there are a couple of bits of points up there. You hear me mention 2X Global, that FinDev is a part of and is supporting through a fund. But just in general, when we talk about investing as a whole, we're looking at trying to fill those gaps that currently exist in our development programming. And not just that, but supporting individuals and communities that want to be able to access growth and development. Currently, when they met last year, the COP group, they had talked about $100 billion gap in financing, $100 billion US gap in financing. Looking at the fact that you have currently about $100 billion committed, $25 billion that's actually been distributed, and about 194 to 360 billion that's still needed to be able to get us to where we need to. And that's specifically for climate change and climate-related adaptation and mitigation. How does this talk about gender? More and more recognizing that gender cannot be spoken of in isolation. There's gender in technology, gender in environment, gender and economic development, and economics as a whole. We need to integrate gender analysis into all of our investment processes in the same way we're trying to integrate gender into our programming for development. So one of the reasons we're having this particular session this afternoon is to understand why and how we've been able to do that in the last few years. So CAFID's community of practice has been able to identify some gaps in financing, have been able to introduce programming either through research or through investments, and then looking at how those programs have improved the financial and social outcomes within those particular societies. Looking at gender lens investing as well as a means of addressing some systemic barriers in capital flows. And that's speaking to a lot of times financing being in what we consider the North versus the South, a term that I'm from the Caribbean, so when they say North and South, I'm like, well, what are you talking about? Because they're different lines of development. You've got high developed economies in the Caribbean, yet they're still considered North and South. But looking at that, what are those barriers for capital flows? Where's investment happening? When you have persons that leave a country that's considered a southern country, a country in the South, and they go somewhere else and they live there and they remit, how is that flow of capital being managed, monitored, identified to be able to benefit those within the countries that they're from? And so looking at those different ways of not just viewing capital from the areas of banking specifically, but how is capital flowing to further the needs of micro, small, and medium enterprises, for example, of government priorities, of educational goals. In general, how are we actually looking at investments in a gender smart and gender lens perspective? And so that's one of the things we're going to be covering this afternoon in different ways, looking at things like access to capital, leadership, products and services, equity in the workplace, women as investors, and finally gender justice, all of which I've taken from the 2X Global. If we do have time, we might have a chance to talk about metrics and measuring gender lens investing success, as well as challenges we're currently facing. And without much further ado, I will then pass on to the first presenter. You ready? So I will have Colleen introduce the work of gender in the IDRC. Thank you very much and look forward to this presentation, Colleen.
Thanks so much, Kazan. It's really great to be here with all of you today. It's good to see a good turnout as well. Just for those of you who don't know IDRC, I know many of you do, but we are part of Canada's foreign affairs and development efforts. And IDRC, basically our mandate, and we exist to champion and fund research and innovation within and alongside developing regions. We invest in high quality research in developing countries, and we work to share knowledge with researchers and policymakers, hopefully for greater uptake and use of that knowledge, with a view to building a more sustainable and inclusive world. So our head office is here in Ottawa. We also have regional offices in Montevideo, in Nairobi, in New Delhi, in Jordan, and in Dakar. Thank you. So what I would like to say, maybe just to kick off the conversation, is we've been hearing a little bit this morning, and I would say also over lunch, from our keynote speaker with the Asian Development Bank. Development financing is, and the trends that we're facing are really facing, we have quite a stark reality that we're dealing with now. And that is that to begin to push the needle of the SDGs, more and smarter financing needs to happen. And there's a need to bring in more actors, both public and private. There's also a need to look for new ways for these actors to work together. And this is where gender lens investing comes in. In order to achieve really the scope and the depth of the improvements that we're looking for in the lives of people in the global south, including women, we believe that investing needs to be more driven from the global south based on local market data, committed to that data being open, and that it's actually data and research that can be acted upon. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about IDRC's work in one sector, the care economy. And for those who aren't familiar with it, the care economy is about care work, which includes paid and unpaid formal and informal domestic work and care of people. So that can be children, the elderly, disabled, special needs groups. Now, research tells us that there's a disproportionate burden of unpaid care work on women, and that this causes them to do less paid work, to enter lower quality jobs, and to reduce their overall labor force participation rates. So the care economy is really crucial to our societies and our economies, but ironically, it remains invisible, it remains unrecognized, it's undervalued, and it's also highly underpaid. Reliable access to affordable and quality care is widely recognized as a major driver of women's increased workforce participation. And having come through the pandemic, we of course are now realizing that it really accelerated the care crisis. That crisis really existed before we went into COVID-19, but it actually really accelerated as well the demand for care work. We saw a disruption in education, and while both women and men spent more time on caring for their own children, as many of us did from home, the bulk of the extra time, the truth of the matter is that it fell upon women and girls. And really research bears that out. Women were also the first to leave employment to care for dependent people at home. So the other thing is that COVID-19 really, as we all know, swept away years of development gains and progress towards gender equality. And it really revealed and threw into stark relief that disproportionate responsibility for care work that women continue to carry, especially poor and marginalized women. So I'd say really the only good thing that the pandemic probably did was make the invisible care work become very visible. So what could we do to tackle that? And we really actually started to think about that quite deeply in IDRC, and I would say much more so with the advent of the pandemic and afterwards. So a couple of years ago, we started to think deeply about how we could mobilize research and how we could work with research in both public investment and in private investment to put the care economy as part of in the center of COVID recovery programs, and to demonstrate that investing in care is good for our economies to grow and to progress towards actual gender equality. But I think the question in all of that, and we're in a session here about investing, is why should investors actually care about that? Well, investing in care is good for the spectrum of the economy. It's good for employees, investors, and other stakeholders. It's estimated that if 2% of global GDP were invested in the care economy, there would be an increase in overall employment ranging from about 2.4 to 6.1% in OECD countries. And those numbers are comparable, probably about 1.2% to 3.2% in emerging markets. Providing childcare to women could add US $3 trillion to global GDP. I don't even know how to write out $3 trillion, but really the fact of the matter is that expanding the child care workforce to meet the current net demands is going to need and will create about 43 million jobs globally. So it's huge. And at the same time, aging populations, displacement, and health issues stemming from things like climate change, which we've been talking about, changing family structures and care needs, increased care dependency ratios, all of that is creating the need for alternatives to care provisions. Am I really at 6?
You are.
Okay, I gotta speed it up. So, as I said, in IDRC, we started to ask really what we could do about this, and we recognized that there's a role for impact investing to support social innovation and entrepreneurs in the care economy, and for gender lens investing to deepen its impact for gender equality. And we realized that there are innovative market-based solutions that are already out there, business models that are out there, and that are providing affordable, high-quality childcare to underserved communities, and that they are helping to improve labor conditions for care and domestic workers. But how could we help as IDRC? We asked ourselves what investors need to invest in the global South care economy and what IDRC as a funder of research could do. And that's actually how we launched the partnership that we call Transforming the Care Economy Through Impact Investing. We launched that in partnership with the Soros Economic Development Fund. And that basically is an initiative that is bringing together development actors, private sector, governments, researchers, entrepreneurs, community-level organizations to tackle the issue of care. The program has 3 pillars, but I'm actually going to only speak to one of them, and I'm going to speak to you very quickly about the research pillar. So the research pillar, which is led by our partner Core Global in collaboration with a number of Southern-based organizations, has a core aspect to it, which is the Care Economy Knowledge Hub. And I would encourage any of you who are interested in this issue to go in and check it out. And basically, the research aims to transform the care economy through identifying, documenting, and amplifying market-based solutions that recognize domestic and care work, that reduce the time dedicated to domestic and care work, that reward the services provided by domestic and care workers, and that redistribute unpaid domestic and care activities to men in the home or to third parties, either private or public. So a little bit about what that looks like, the types of activities, research activities that we have engaged in through TCEII. A big part of it is around mapping promising care entrepreneurs globally and creating business profiles to help connect and inform actors in gender lens investing and across that ecosystem, including especially entrepreneurs and investors, both public and private. It's around developing and disseminating business case studies that share learning and intel across the gender lens impact investing ecosystem and through focused engagements. So very quickly, here are a few examples of the businesses that TCEII has helped to map. I'm going to just really speak to Latin America really quickly, but there are other regions that are just as exciting. In Mexico, for example, there's Hippocampus, which provides early childhood care for working families. There are also businesses, for example, Live Up in Chile and Ugogo in Argentina that focus on elderly care. And in the TCEII hub, it also includes businesses that focus on reducing the drudgery of domestic work. So for example, Inno Verde in Guatemala provides drinking water solutions to families who are suffering from water scarcity. So a big part of it is helping women in their other duties and offset their care responsibilities. I'm going to finish up.
Yeah.
So maybe what are some of the early successes and what are we learning? It's still very much underway, but I'll mention maybe quickly 3 things. Nazava Water Filters was approached by an outfit known as Aqua for All to apply for its technical assistance program. So we're actually seeing increased visibility of these initiatives and investor interest in them. We're seeing also increased investment. Another one of these enterprises, Simplifica, received US dollars 3 million from Soros and Acumen funds just to really build and scale that work. And I would also mention and conclude with this that the IFC's Care to Equal team is using the business profiles that I flashed up to actually better understand the potential for investment in the childcare sector globally. So we heard a lot this morning around how multilateral organizations actually need to change their models and change the way they're doing things. And I think things like this hub are actually working with DFIs to actually help them get better at doing that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Colleen. Can we have Colleen a round of applause before we go to the next presenter? So Colleen set the stage really well. So while Lindsay's heading to the podium, I just want to point out two things. Colleen talked about the development finance institutions, and those are those, whether it's national development banks or other groups that currently exist within societies to be able to support financial growth and investments. And then just looking at that overall question of what is gender equality, women and girls being priorities, but also men and boys being included in the discussion. And I think Lindsay's going to speak to a little bit of how that broader approach will work as well. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you, Kazan, and thank you, Colleen. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. There we are. And just before I get to this, I am here also wearing my CAFID hat. I'm the current chair of the board of CAFID. I just want to say these are 4 of 6 case studies. I want to give a big thanks to CAIDP for giving us the opportunity to share these case studies in a public platform, but also encourage everybody to visit the CAFID website because there's also case studies from Serona Asset Management and Deakin Impact as well. And just to say as well, thank you to the CEDNET, the Canadian Economic Development Network, for funding to put the case studies together. So what I'm going to, taking that hat off, putting on my META hat, I'm going to talk about the MasterCard Foundation Africa Growth Fund. And this is an initiative that's about 1.5 years in implementation. It's fully funded by the MasterCard Foundation, and it's actually let me just jump ahead because I know time is of the essence. It's a $200 million fund of funds that's focusing on addressing some of the underlying barriers of gender lens investing in Africa. It's the largest gender lens investing initiative in Africa at the moment. And as you can see, there are 3 elements to it: $150 million, which will be invested into about 20 different gender diverse investment vehicles with a particular focus on female fund managers. We've got a $25 million business development and business value creation initiative, as well as a significant amount of resources for collaboration management, as well as learning. There's a really strong learning component. Just jumping back a bit, just to say a little bit about META, for those of you that don't know us, we just celebrated our 70th anniversary. We're an NGO, and one of the unique things about META is that the very first thing that we did was an investment. And so investment's been part of the DNA since the beginning. And so we often combine investment along with looking at the wider market system to really try to drive private sector growth with the focus primarily on agriculture, to really help drive economies, help to make sure they're more inclusive and sustainable. And we were one of the first blended finance partners for Global Affairs Canada as well. So the goal of the MasterCard Foundation Africa Growth Fund is to really address some of the underlying barriers related to women in the investment ecosystem. And so we will be supporting 20 female-led and gender diverse investment vehicles. And we're calling them investment vehicles because we're supporting a whole variety of different types of investment organizations. So it could be venture capital funds, could be equity funds, could be debt funds. They can be of a variety of size. The key thing is that they need to be domiciled in Africa, and they need to be gender diverse, with a focus first on women-led funds. Why are we doing this? Well, we have an underlying thesis that by investing in women-led funds, we're going to see more investment and impact in women-led SMEs. You know, we know across the board, first of all, finance has a lot of bias in it generally. So women-led SMEs have greater challenges accessing finance in all geographies. And so we believe that women-led fund managers or women-led funds are much more likely or open to investing in women-led SMEs. Women-led SMEs have a greater focus on women throughout, so throughout those 2X criteria that I know will be spoken about. So women-led businesses often have a greater impact in terms of women employees, women customers. And so we think by going up here, we can have greater impact down here. And we're taking a really strong gender, but also equity and diversity and inclusion lens throughout the investment cycle. And one of the reasons why we do have the funds for learning and sharing is that we really want to try to influence the broader ecosystem. And particularly the DFIs on a couple of areas. One is encouraging them to support more women-led funds, but also encouraging them to invest more in locally domiciled funds as well, which is another barrier. So this is just a little bit about how we integrate gender and throughout the investment cycle. And just to say as well, MEETA is the lead of a consortium of organizations. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. So we are overseeing the entire fund. We've actually set up a separate foundation in Mauritius, but we also set up a separate NGO here called MEETA Impact Investment, which is, we believe, the first Canadian NGO with the explicit charitable mandate to do impact investing. And throughout this, we have Criterion Institute as our gender partner. I know they're well known here. But throughout the overall investment process, we take a strong GLI lens, including how we're screening the investment vehicles, how the SMEs that the investment vehicles are going to invest into are focused on gender. We work with them to develop gender action plans and all the way through making sure that lens is there. We're of course tracking progress, not just at the fund level, but all the way down through the portfolio company level. And as a key part of this is as we're going out to meet with the funds and to meet with their investees, to have a really strong gender-related due diligence. Often gender lens investing, in some cases it's a bit of an add-on after you've gone through all the other investment elements. It's, oh, well, what is the gender component? We believe we need to bake it in right from the beginning. This is just a little detour to say, one of the things that MEETA's worked on for many years, and you may have heard of it, is our GEM framework, which is the Gender Equality Mainstreaming Framework, which is a tool that we've used in a number of our programs. We've applied it to about 40 different SMEs of different sectors and different geographies, as well as a variety of investment funds. And what the GEM does, and this helped to inform some of the work that we're doing in the Africa Growth Fund, is really helps to place businesses on a trajectory from being gender blind, or so gender is not a factor at all the way through to gender transformative. The rapid assessment, please, I hope the QR code works. I had to update it. Did it? But okay, good. It'll give you a series of questions, and essentially what it does is it asks the businesses, you know, how are you integrating gender in your own internal policies, in your client policies, kind of, I guess, top to bottom. How is gender a factor in the business that you do? And last year, we went back and asked about 20 of the businesses that we had worked with, and we might have done our GEM assessment. So you go through an appraisal and you develop an action plan, and sometimes there's technical assistance to support it. Sometimes the firms do it on their own. But anyways, we went back and said, okay, we did this assessment 4 or 5 years ago. What's happened? And you know, what are your reflections on it? And across the board, everyone said that it was helpful. It helped them to think through some new issues. In many cases, maybe about 75%, they said it actually helped to increase their revenues over time. You know, there is a business case for gender inclusion. So particularly firms that were anything consumer facing, by thinking about gender, they were often able to increase the number of women customers or clients that they had. And they did that through improving the number of often women sales agents. And they were able to get the women sales agents and able to work better by improving the overall HR systems, policies, thinking about maternity leave for the first time often with a lot of businesses. So many of the things that Colleen spoke about. So anyways, I'm just taking us on a little detour, but to say it very much builds upon some work that Mita's been doing for quite some time. So to date, just in the terms of the Africa Growth Fund, we've done 5 investments. I think there's a few more going through. We've invested about 35 million of the 150 million. All of them, portfolio companies, meet the 2X criteria at the minimum. 67%, sorry, there's a typo there, meet 2. So anyways, this just kind of gives you a flow through. And we've got a number of really great investment partners that we're now working with. We've created or sustained a number of jobs, both direct and indirect, in the wider value chain.
1 minute.
Some of the key takeaways, and I know I'm going to have to jump, is that there is huge demand for gender-focused investment, particularly in Africa, and that's not a great surprise. The woman on the left is Adesua Rhodes. She runs Arua Capital out of Nigeria. She had been trying to close her fund, despite having about over a decade's experience on Wall Street, I think for about 5-6 years. You know, people would just not close her, not give her the money to do investments, despite having a very strong track record. Anyways, we co-funded it along with Visa Foundation and a couple of others. She's already investing. We're seeing good returns. The other thing that comes up a lot in our discussions, and something that we're working on with separate research, is really about where funds are located and some of the challenges that those have. And then also really thinking through how do we tailor support, because different organizations are at different stages in the cycle. And that's that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lindsay. So you're going to keep hearing the phrase impact investing a lot when we talk about gender lens investing, because the idea is that the two are connected. To be able to have gender lens investing, you must have some kind of impact, and vice versa. You can't do impact investing unless you have a gender lens. So, Jessie, you ready?
Yes.
Thank you.
So thank you for having me. Thanks everyone for being here. End of day session. That's really great. And a topic that I find so interesting. So anyway, I'm Jessie Green. I work at FinEd Canada, which is Canada's Development Finance Institution, or DFI. We're a Canadian Crown Corporation. Just celebrated our 5th birthday, growing very strongly. And still figuring things out as well, so as you'll see in my presentation. So we invest in 3 sectors: financial intermediaries, that includes financial institutions and funds. The second area is agribusiness value chains and forestry. And the third area is sustainable infrastructure. Our regions are Latin America and the Caribbean and Sub-Saharan Africa. We just added the Indo-Pacific this year, but that's really just starting up. And so mainly right now we're in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. And the sectors that I mentioned intersect with 3 cross-cutting areas, which are, or impact objectives, which are climate and nature action, gender equality, which we're talking about today, and market development. So I kind of grayed out the 2 others because gender equality obviously is the most important one for this discussion. And we mentioned the 2X criteria a little bit, so I'll come back to that, but that's really what we use as a main reference when we're talking about gender equality and women's economic empowerment. We also, there's a lot of points in common with Mita's approach in gender lens investing, and that makes a lot of sense. We're both looking at some of the best practices that are in the market. So we're really incorporating gender lens investing and a gender analysis from the pre-screening, during the due diligence, the monitoring, and the reporting. So there's a cycle that's a positive cycle. that feeds into itself. And so these are the 2X criteria as they are presently. You can see there's some criteria that are pertaining to the share of women ownership, share of women in senior management, on the board, the decision-making mechanisms. And these criteria are all available online, and they are being reviewed presently. So a new iteration of these criteria will be coming out soon, or I think just came out. They are becoming more, I think, more sophisticated, but this is what we're using right now, and that's going to be reviewed soon. So I'm here to talk about the case study. So the case study that we wrote for the CAFID case studies, which is about EEGF. And EEGF is an investment that we made as a blended investment from FinDev Canada's core capital and the 2X Canada facility, which is a facility that is funded by Global Affairs Canada and that really targets women's economic empowerment and COVID recovery. EEGF is the first investment that we made from the 2X Canada facility. A very interesting fund that's operating in sub-Saharan Africa and focusing on access to energy. And there's this really strong relationship between, so we're talking about the care economy before, women's workload and access to energy. And energy, there's a lot of people who still don't have access to energy in sub-Saharan Africa, and gaining access to energy can really change women's lives and girls as well. So EEGF is funding companies that bring access to energy to remote areas, to off-grid areas, sustainable, all kinds of different kinds of companies, very diversified, can be solar panels or solar-powered water pumps. So you can easily imagine how those would affect the workload of women. When we invested, we expected that the companies would bring access to clean energy, so the fund's investees would bring access to clean energy for 5.4 million beneficiaries. We expected some additional economic opportunities for women, and at least 50% of the fund's investees were supposed to be 2X eligible. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this fund was set up by the Shell Foundation, which is an interesting, was mentioned before, and FMO, which is a Dutch DFI, and is managed by a company called Triple Jump in the Netherlands. And they have an office in Nairobi, which is managing this fund. So what we've seen so far, and I'm going to run through this very quickly, the fund is not yet fully invested. They have now 11 investees. They're still deploying their funding. They have a few more years to finish investing the fund, but we're already super excited about what we're seeing. And one of the things we're doing with them is doing a research project actually to really explore what are the impacts for women who now have access to energy, like what has changed for them. So they have a huge data set because they've already brought, or their investees have already brought access to energy for about 1.4 million people. So that's a huge basin that we can study. And this is really across some difficult economies. We're in DRC, Malawi, Nigeria, and lots of countries where access to energy is very low. So all of the investees are actually now 2X eligible, which is a really positive. So we thought it would be about 50%, but in the end, all of their investees are 2X eligible. Women make up 50% of EEGF's workforce and 40% of its investment committee. And they have funded 200, so their investees are working with 242 female-led businesses which have gained access to energy. And then I wanted to, I don't know how I'm doing on time.
Yep, you're okay.
I wanted to leave you with a photo of the team that's managing the fund in Nairobi. The man in the middle is just doing technical, well, not just, but he's doing technical assistance, so he's not the investee team. The women are all the investee team. And so, you hear a lot in Africa, it's like, oh, we can't find women, that there's no women talent, blah, blah, blah. Not true. Like this team, amazing, so professional, so sharp, like doing some amazing work, very much up and coming. And so that gives me a lot of confidence in the future and general lens investing in Africa. So thanks.
Thanks, Jessie. All right, Jacqueline, you want to close the show for the panel?
Good afternoon. I'm Jacqueline Evans. I'm VP of Investments at Equality Fund, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different sort of perspective here because I think it's important to also think about, what does it mean investing with a gender lens across a portfolio? The Equality Fund's model is quite unique, and I think is a case study in itself. So this is just a background for those of you who are new to the world of gender lens investment, but this is the GIN definition of what a gender lens investment and the approaches that investors can take to understanding gender alignment. But in practice, it means taking into consideration the participation, the needs and realities, and leadership of all genders across all aspects of investment decision making. So it's an end-to-end approach. It's not just thinking about who's making the decisions around investments, but also sort of the outcome of those investments and how they have impacts on gender. And I know Colleen touched upon it, but the potential in terms of the industry as a whole is vast. There's over $18 billion available in terms of gender lens investments, and it's incredibly it's a wide spectrum of opportunities and availabilities, and each of the case studies that have been featured thus far are very specific, interesting case studies. But I think as an investor who's looking to invest across all asset classes, I think it's interesting to highlight different approaches that you can take to each asset class. So I'll start with what the Equality Fund is and what we're trying to do. So in 2019, the Government of Canada awarded a consortium of partners with $300 million to form the Equality Fund, and it became the largest single investment ever made by a government into a global feminist movement. At our core, we are a charity that funds feminist activists and feminist organizations globally. We make grants to feminist organizations primarily in the Global South. And what's unique about this model is that it's not just we're going to be one of the largest grantors to feminist organizations globally, but we are also committed to working in the sphere of gender lens investments and being a catalytic partner to encouraging other investors into the sphere of gender lens investments. So we work on the investment side alongside with fiduciary partner, the Toronto Foundation, and our outsourced Chief Investment Officer, Rock Creek, to ensure that this $300 million that we have been awarded by the Government of Canada is fully invested in gender-aligned investments. And effectively, that pool of capital will be a self-sustaining engine, financial engine to support our grant-making operations over the course of the next many years. So how does this all work in practice? Well, we have three pillars. We have grant-making at the core, and as I mentioned, we are moving resources, unrestricted, sustainable funding to feminist organizations in the Global South, which is in itself a very bold and unprecedented formula in the sense that we provide funding that doesn't require specific project criteria. It is, we are writing checks to organizations and saying, use it for what you need. And that is really transformative in the world of grant making. But to fund those grants, that's where the investments pillar comes into play. And so on the investment side, we are designing our portfolio that is 100% gender aligned to fund those grants on an annual basis. So our portfolio needs to be liquid or have a certain amount of liquidity. It needs to be market returning or at a minimum so that we can ensure that we are getting the returns on that portfolio that we grant out on an annual basis, because we want to preserve the original corpus of capital. We don't want to spend down that $300 million. We want to use that as really the financial engine to support ongoing grant making. And then finally, we work with a number of philanthropic partners, foundations, high net worth individuals, as well as other bilateral relationships with governments, including not just Canada, but also the UK. And we have ongoing discussions with other government organizations who would like to use the Equality Fund as a means to support their grant-making initiatives in the Global South. So this is what our portfolio looks like sort of across asset classes. So as I mentioned, our portfolio needs to be liquid, it needs to be income generating, and we need to preserve our corpus. And as such, we have invested our portfolio across asset classes. So we have public equity, fixed income, private debt, and private markets, private equity investments as well. What does it mean to invest in a public company? What does it mean with a gender lens? Well, we are using indexes that have been the basis of which gender data aggregators go through and comb through public company reporting and do questionnaires to those public companies to understand on a various number of metrics how gender aligned an organization is. And so that's using that. We've designed an index. We've designed sort of different products on the public equity sphere that not only meet our returns and liquidity objectives, but also are vehicles that other investors could invest into. One of the objectives and mandates that we have at Equality Fund is how can we create products where we can mobilize other foundations, other high net worth investors, and even individuals and retail investors to come into the sphere of gender lens investment. Similarly, on the fixed income side, we've invested in the, alongside the World Bank, into a gender bond that we launched a few years ago. And the funds from this bond are being used to support projects that the World Bank is funding that have a specific gender alignment. Where you can have a great amount of impact, and a number of the panelists have just spoken about this, is on the private side, though, and you could have a much greater impact on the gender lens with private investments. And so we have designed a private debt fund with actually a U.S. manager that invests in female-led businesses in the U.S. And tracks those investments in terms of how they're supporting women's economic empowerment, policies and procedures that are working towards fair wages and other anti-harassment policies, etc. And then similarly on the private equity side, we've invested in a handful of private equity funds that are focused on investing in either women-led businesses or those that have into sectors and segments that have a disproportionate impact to gender equality. And so a lot of the areas that we've touched on thus far around like the care economy, healthcare, education, access to financial products, a lot of the underlying investments that we have invested in on the private equity side are focused in those specific areas. So, you know, we've all touched upon sort of, well, how do you take an approach and what is the framework that you're using to understand gender alignment? On the private capital side, we've informed our framework from 2X, from GIN, from other best practices in space to understand sort of 3 pillars that we look at when we're trying to decide whether an investment is gender aligned. How is it supporting increasing access to capital? So are the investments into the funds and companies providing access to capital for previously overlooked populations? How are the products and services that those investee companies delivering supporting women? So this is where the thematic sector approach is really critical to understanding the sectors like, as I mentioned, education, clean energy, clean water, food security, healthcare, the care economy. How are those companies in those sectors supporting and reducing gender inequality? And then finally, the final pillar is really around the governance, leadership, structures that are in place within those funds, as well as their investee companies that are supporting gender equality. And in addition to all of this, we also try to take an intersectional approach. So we are also trying to understand, well, gender is often an entry point into understanding impacts when it comes to environmental factors, other social factors, and governance factors. So you can actually think about when you're doing using a gender lens framework, it's often an entry point for you to do a broader analysis into other ESG considerations. So our progress to date, so we have invested our portfolio with is fully invested with a gender lens. The 300 million thus far in the 3 years that we've been sort of actively investing has already generated over nearly 30 million of income that is going directly to supporting our grants to feminist organizations globally. So, we are fulfilling what our promise of becoming this very holistic engine where we are trying to not only support feminist movements, but also really trying to address gender inequality within the financial systems as well. And it's, the portfolio is performing in line or has exceeded expectations in its benchmarks since inception. So I think it's really important to think that investing with a gender lens is not concessionary, or it doesn't need to be concessionary. In terms of outcomes, we've organized how our investments with looking at relative to various outcomes. So how does the investment provide for basic needs, encourage empowerment, the intersectional impact, as I mentioned, with other ESG priorities? Is it focused on good governance? How does it intersect with clean energy, clean environment as well? Our geographic exposure is currently heavily weighted to, I would say, the global north, and that is really because our portfolio currently is heavily weighted to public equities, and we only have information right now from a gender perspective on, I would say, global north companies. However, that's changing, and so I hope within the next few years we will have greater exposure into emerging markets and into public companies in the global south that we can really apply this gender lens as well to. And then finally, in terms of other statistics, it's really important. On the private side, we've got our investments have, represent 79% of them are female owned. For funds that we're investing in, 38% have women on the investment team, which is multiples of what the industry average is, I should say. And then in terms of female employment, we're nearly at 50% and hope to improve that metric as well. So I'll leave it there.
Awesome.